I don't know what that is.
It's like feeling up. Crew depart, show ready. This is cool. Crew call, freelancers. It's like some video TV schedule thing. Wow. Oh.
Okay. If I could get everybody's attention, please. Good afternoon. Hello. Excellent. We have a pretty full agenda today, so I'd like to go ahead and get started. As just a couple of reminders, we do have to vacate this room pretty promptly at 12:45 and take all your garbage with you. Oh, sorry. Remove all your rubbish. This is an official IETF meeting. The note well applies and all of the aspects of it. Also, as a reminder to please remember that we do have a code of conduct and we want to be nice to everybody. As I mentioned, we do have a fairly full agenda today. And so we do have a little bit of time for an open mic at the end. And any continuing conversations can always continue on the mailing list. There is a notes page linked from the agenda. I will note that there's also a chat room linked from the agenda, but we have a tiny issue where it's not linked actually to the working group chairs ZULIP, it's linked to the EMODIR ZULIP. So for today's meeting, if you're going to use the chat room online, it's going to be linked to EMODIR. And we'll get that fixed in the future. That's one of the things that we're kind of aware of. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and get started. The first item, I guess I should allow a tiny agenda bash. Agenda bashing, anybody? Nope. Nope. Okay, excellent. So with the first, we are going to introduce our new RFC series consulting editor. Alexis, did you want to come forward and
hello, everybody. I just wanted to say hi and hello. All the lovely people I met at the social last night. So I'm new. I've only been here for about 2 months, so my comprehension level of everything you guys do at this meeting is about 30%, I'd say. So I'm hoping at the next one it'll be at least 80%. So if you have anything that you would like to bring up with me, the current things I'm working on are a revamp of the rfceditor.org website. Kind of getting all of our archiving agreements up to date, where we take full sets of the RFCs and make sure they're housed somewhere else for safekeeping. And also just started working on making sure that all of the outlinks from RFCs get preserved. The idea behind that being you put all of this time into writing something, you want people to be able to actually understand what your references meant. 10 or 20 years from now, those links will probably die. So we're going to get those archived and make sure that those remain legible over time. If you have other things that you think I should be looking at in the future, or if you just want to talk to me about any of those things, please come find me. Okay.
Thanks, Alexis. So I guess there weren't any specific questions for Alexis. If there are, you can ask them at the end of the session. Next up, we have introducing our legal team and a few words from them.
Everybody, and thanks a lot for the opportunity to do this. I'm Brad Biddle, my colleague Vigdis Bronder Can you hear me okay? Sorry.
Yeah, you got to eat it.
Got it. Yeah, so thank you for the opportunity to introduce ourselves. I'm Brad Biddle and my colleague Vigdis Bronder. We're part of the legal team that supports IETF. We've been in this role since 2018. Many of you, I'm sure, know George Contreras, who played the role of legal support for the IETF for many years. George, an excellent lawyer who really built an incredible foundation. And we do still stay in touch with George and use him as a consultant at various times. We have 15 minutes today, which I don't know that we really will need. I thought maybe we would just spend a minute kind of giving a little bit of background about ourselves and just really as an introduction, so you have names and faces and a general sense of who we are. In terms of substantive things we could potentially talk about, the antitrust issue is one that's been up lately. We have a internet draft that's in front of the Gen Dispatch group right now. And one of the points of feedback we've gotten about that has related to working group chairs. So maybe I'll circle back to that and just see if there's any, give you a little more sense of what we're doing there and talk a little bit about the potential for antitrust training, if that would be of interest to the working group chairs. But why don't we start just initially with a little bit about us and our firm. So we're part of a small law firm called Biddle Law PC. As I mentioned, we took over the role of supporting IETF back in 2018. Generally, what we do is we're a boutique law firm with 3 lawyers, and we supported several different standards organizations in addition to the IETF, and that's really all we do is support standards organizations. My personal background is I was previously played a role at Intel Corporation called SIGS and Standards, led a group called SIGS and Standards Practice Group. And so Intel was an interesting place to learn standards because it's a company that's involved in many, many different standards and open source organizations. And prior to that, I worked for a big law firm, Silicon Valley law firm, Cooley Godward, and also for a short period was general counsel of an internet music startup back in the heady days of the first .com boom called mp3.com. So let me ask my colleague Vigdis if she could do a quick intro, and then maybe we can circle back to the antitrust and any other topics you want to hear about.
So hi, everyone. My name is Vigdis Bronder, and I work with Brad. My background was also at a large law firm where I started out in tech transactions and went in-house in a tech counsel role, and then moved out west in search of a better life and found Brad, and he introduced me to the world of standards, and I've been dedicating my practice to that since then. So great to meet you all.
So yeah, so let's maybe just spend a minute. I can give you some background on this issue of antitrust, because I do think that is maybe the one current topic that's that has some relevance for all of you. Generally, when we talk about antitrust law, we're talking also, it's like the terminology can also be competition law. And so that's the general issue in connection with standards is anytime, a set of competitors, potential competitors are getting together and talking with each other, that can be really beneficial and ultimately result in consumer benefit. But there's always the kind of risk of some kind of collusion among commercial entities that have some market power. And so it's a kind of perennial issue for standards organizations is how do you manage the risk of antitrust law problems or competition law problems. The IETF is actually very cleverly designed, and I think very intentionally designed in a way that that mitigates antitrust risks. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why this is true. We have a blog post, the IETF LLC a while back did a blog post that kind of walked through this analysis, and it's something that's captured to some degree in the ID that's currently in front of Gen Dispatch. So generally our key message around antitrust in connection with the IETF is follow our policies. Our existing policies, if they're implemented, correctly, are really specifically designed to mitigate antitrust risks. We do have this ID that's currently, as I mentioned, in front of Gen Dispatch, and it's not intended to be a new policy. It's really intended to say, hey, stakeholders who are worried about antitrust risks in connection with IETF, please understand this is our approach. Our approach is, we do have these various elements of how we're organized, how the IETF is designed, that do mitigate these risks. And so the really key message is follow these policies. It also makes the point that there are some areas, some topics that are kind of potentially fraught with antitrust risk, that they're not off limits, but potentially can be a little dicey. And the specific issues that are flagged are, one, when we're trying to compare the relative cost of different implementations. That's that analysis can get tricky. Sorry, the microphone. Sorry. Comparing the relative cost of technical implementations can be a tricky analysis to do, because it starts to get into issues like specific prices and things like that, which can be problematic from an antitrust perspective. So relative cost issues is one area of concern. Another area of concern potentially is around something that's perceived as negotiating IPR terms. And so this can be a tricky one in the IETF context, because we do, specifically go and ask, it's a requirement that people disclose something about their relevant IPR. Where it can get a little bit tricky is if we get a ambiguous or potentially problematic disclosure, and there's some desire to go and talk with that disclosure, the party that disclosed, about their disclosure. That's a legitimate thing to do. The area that gets a bit fraught is if it starts to look like there's some kind of collective negotiation with that party about their IP terms. So that's a point that's made in the document, and what we say there is, hey, these aren't off limits, but do talk to IETF experts about this before you start doing these kinds of things. I think some of the input we got from the working group chairs was, well, hey, whoa, are we the people that are going to be receiving these questions? And if so, we have concerns about that. We hear you on that point, and I think our message is, we are here as resources for you. So if at any point there's any elements of antitrust law, or really any other issue where you receive questions that feel uncomfortable for any reason, you can escalate to us. It's probably best to escalate to us through Jay, or through the legal at IETF.org mailing list. But we really are here as a resource for you. Our intent is to come back to you at some point in the future and do a round of a little bit more formal training on antitrust issues. So I hope this would be of interest to you. It's not required or anything like that. It's really designed to be something that's educational, and so we really, we'll be interested to come back and do that. I see Sean has a question.
Check. All right, I'll eat it. Hey, so Brad, I guess the question about the IPR thing, I think the tool actually allows you to submit an IPR disclosure, even third party, with no statement. So you can go and ask. So should that be tweaked, where they actually have to put something to kind of stop this nebulous, kind of not clear claim?
I think my instinct right now is nothing's really broken. Right. We have, these issues are complex, and there's lots of moving parts, and what we have just works 99% of the time. So I'm less inclined to go and make changes for these sort of one-off potential edge cases. So I guess my answer is I don't really have an inclination to change anything right now. It's more of just an educational thing. If you get that weird situation where you feel compelled to go and ask questions, it's worth looping in either just people who are experienced in how we've done that in the past, or loop in us, but to get some help for those.
Okay, great. Thanks for the clarification.
Michael Richardson. Does it work? Oh, you have to really eat it, you said. So are there any legal or financial consequences to entities that make useless, pointless IPR claims, especially that are so vague that no one can do anything with them?
So when somebody makes a claim like, you're saying when within
Some
the
patent
IETF
that I have not yet really disclosed, affects the FUBAR working group and don't even tell us what document or what section.
Yeah.
And it happens like seemingly on a regular basis, right? From people I think ought to know better, but there doesn't seem to be any consequence to doing that.
Yeah, it's probably like the exact facts would matter in any particular case. I would say maybe what would probably be helpful to us is to really articulate the problem statement. You know, like, is this behavior causing a very specific problem for you? Or
Well, yeah, it's causing 100 people in the working group to waste 2 hours of their time figuring out what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, we have to decide if we care or not, and we're not supposed to really do this collectively. So we actually individually have to somehow decide this is bullshit. And then there's no consequence. They can just do it again.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, interesting feedback and useful. Like, I think that's the kind of thing that I think we would say, oh, is my theory that nothing really is broken correct? And if there is something broken, let's identify that and think about a solution. So I'm happy to have more discussion about that.
Hi, Leif Johansson. So as a working group chair, when should I, what should trigger me to come talk to you? Is there anything that, any kind of concrete advice that you can give me? Like, if you hear these sort of things, then, you know, that's when you give us a ring. Yeah, so in the current ID and in the training that we will eventually deliver to you, we do have some, you know, there's some things that are kind of obvious red flags. Like if someone's talking about like the price of specific products and, you know, kind of like classic antitrust problems, like let's divide this market or things like that. So there's some things that would just be like big red flags. I think those kinds of discussions never really happen here. The trickier ones are probably the two that I mentioned. You know, we're trying to do some kind of comparative cost analysis, or we're trying to have a kind of a nuanced IPR discussion. So those would be the general topics. But I do think there's a lot of experience within the IETF about how to handle those topics. So it's not necessarily that like we are the only resources for you, but I do think that those are the topics that probably warrant some care. All right, I think.
This is a point of order question. Are we using the online queue for queuing?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Juan Carlos Zúñiga. I share, and I would like to respond a little bit to Michael's point. I know that most of us have very little understanding of legal language, and it's hard for engineers to understand and act upon legal text. So it's indeed something that is confusing and hard to follow whenever there's a declaration that it's hard to understand, especially if we don't understand the claims, what is exactly the licensing terms that are being disclosed, how will that affect my business model, respect to the product, etc. So all these little details should be taken into account whenever we act upon that. And of course, most people here do not understand those details. So perhaps we should try to make sure that the process flows, educate people on simple things like licensing terms. For instance, whenever there's a declaration, what type of license is being declared, right? Is it a friend? Is it a royalty-free? How will this affect the future of the product that will implement this specification? Those little rules could help us understand and make sure that the group understands how we should act upon that declaration. Because indeed, I've seen multiple times that people take a declaration. There's a patent. Oh, yes, no. I mean, there's a lot of things that we have to understand beyond whether the patent applies to that part of the specification, if it's an optional, mandatory, or not. So we can go deeper and deeper, and we are not going to have a legal discussion in the working group because we are technical people, right? But at least maybe just to make things clear to people, we should understand the type of licenses, the consequences, the implications, and from there we say, okay, if you need more information, go talk to your legal team, because this would potentially affect your company, your business model, your interests, and not the working groups in general.
Got it. Okay, yeah, that's quite helpful input. So what I'm hearing is, we had some interest in coming back and presenting training on antitrust issues. It sounds like there'd also potentially be some interest in a practical issue that you all have is you get an IPR declaration, it's confusing, you're not sure how to react to it. And so giving some suggestions for you about how to interpret and potentially how to react to IPR declarations could be something that's useful. So message heard on that.
Hi, Jim Fenton. Apologies if this is a little bit out of order, but to what extent are you advising us on things like export controls and sanctioned countries and things of that sort? Or are we kind of on our own because that's a country-specific issue?
That's definitely a topic that's within our purview, and we provide advice to the LLC, which is really the legal entity that's responsible for managing compliance with with all sorts of with law and regulation around the globe. So it's definitely in our purview. And if there's like a specific issue that you need input on, we'd be available for that. Generally, it's something that we do feel like is being well managed in a kind of top-down way through the LLC.
Can I just remind people when you've finished eating, please to put masks on? Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right. Well, if there's no other questions, do you have any last words, Vigdis? Yeah, we appreciate the discussion, yeah, we're again really do appreciate the opportunity to be here. And
I believe we have a remote person in the queue, so just hold 1 second.
Sure.
James, are you there?
Thank you, Karen. Sorry for the last minute. Just to echo the previous things about IPR declarations being important, one thing to consider as well as document shepherds, we have a step in the process where we have to show that we've sufficiently pestered people to make their appropriate IPR declarations, and it's not clear how best to do that. If you're going to be providing guidance to chairs and thus document shepherds on IPR things, it would be good to consider that as well.
Got it. Yep, understood that one component, if we're going to come back with some suggestions on how to manage IPR declarations, a component of that would be that piece of you going and asking about IPR and giving some guidance on that. So thank you.
All right. So thank you both very much. Yeah. And as you've heard, they've offered to do training. So any further things that you think you might want some additional training on, you could post that to the working group chairs mailing list, and we'll make sure that they get a chance to see that. So next up is Ignacio.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? To button slides? Oh, no, just speak first. Okay. Well, hello, everybody. I'm going to be telling you a little bit about what I see that it's going on the IETF through some work that I've been doing with colleagues from the University of Glasgow, some of who you might know. And most of the findings that I'm presenting here are in some papers that we have already published. We combine a little bit of social network analysis and natural language processing to analyze emails, drafts, and everything that is going on there. Next slide, please. And the basic key takeaways that we have seen through this couple of years of researching on the IETF data is that conversation seems to be more complex. It seems to be harder to publish, and it seems that there is a influential minority that is becoming increasingly relevant. Next slide, please. And this seems to be interrelated. Next, please. So let me focus quickly first on whether it's harder to publish. Next, please. It's quite a few graphs, so maybe don't worry too much about reading into the axes, but basically the key takeaway is that in the last 20 years, it now we triple the amount of time it takes for an RFC to be published from the time the first draft appears. Next slide. It also takes more than double the number of drafts for an RFC to be published. Next slide. And there are a few other findings, like there are more affiliations, more areas, more authors for every single draft pretty consistently. And this seems to point in the direction that it's harder to publish. Of course, this is all with caveats because numbers are numbers, but interpretation might be subtle. Conversations also seem to be more complex. Next slide, please. Next. The IETF is becoming quite chatty. There is a decreasing number of email participants. This is people who have sent at least one email in 1 year. So if for 1 year you don't send anything, you would appear as not a participant. And in the next one, you send an email, you would appear there. Next slide, please. If you look at the red line, that's the number of emails. And as you can see, there is an increasing divergence, which is what I refer to as the IETF becoming chatty. Basically, less people and similar amount of emails, so pretty much more emails per person. Next slide, please. And just for context, I've also been looking at the web consortium, and similar dynamics happen there, so it's not unique to the IETF. Next slide. There is also an increasing number of mentions to drafts in the emails. This is normalized by the number of active drafts at a given in a given year. To me, this points to increasing cross-references, increasing number of things that need to be taken into account. And that's what I refer to as conversations becoming more complex. You need to be on top of more emails. You need to be on top of more drafts. And next slide, please. And it seems to be that at the same time, there is an influential minority that is gaining relevance. And I have more results on the papers pointing, for example, to more areas, more topics being discussed in the conversations. So next slide, please. Next. So to get a better understanding on what's going on in the inside of the mail list, we do a graph of the people in the mail list. So basically, each one of you could be a node, and if you reply to a message of someone else, that would be a link. And then we calculate betweenness as a metric of influence, which is typically done in social network analysis. And what you can see there is people plotted by the level of influence that they have from more to less. So on the extreme left, you have the more influential people. On the right, less influential people, according to that metric. And what you can see is that on the one hand, people are discussing more areas over the years, and these are IETF areas. And on the other hand, this is mostly done by people who is more influential. So over the years, more areas are being discussed, and influential people are particularly prominent in discussing more areas. And next slide, please. And this influential minority is also dominating draft creation. So more, an increasing number of drafts are authored by these people, probably some of you, that are particularly critical in terms of centrality on the graph of the mail list. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, it looks like it takes a longer amount of time to gain influence. Next slide, please. And to focus a little bit on you guys, this is about working group chairs. So this is looking 1 year before someone becomes a working group chair, and 1 year looking after that person becomes working group chair. And this is in the period 2000-2020, which most of the analysis is, because data tracker is more reliable for that period. And we also built a graph of authorship, pretty much similar to the one of the mails. And we calculate again betweenness, it's a metric of influence. So basically, if you are in the crossroad of many drafts, you will have high betweenness as a metric of influence. Next slide, please. And there are, I would say, two key takeaways here. One is that most of the working group chairs are pretty influential, both in the draft authorship graph and on the mail list. Next one. And that there is a clear shift 1 year, well, 2 years, because this is 1 year before you become a working group chair, and 1 year after, there is a clear shift on how influential you are in both of these graphs. Next slide, please. And this is very high level and very quickly the research that you can find in those papers. And my impression is that it is harder to publish and the conversations are more complex, and this is pretty much interrelated. The space is smaller, many things are becoming a commodity, many things are not novel developments, but frequently patching. So there is increasing dependence between drafts, between technologies. And as a result of this, conversations are quite complicated. You need to be on top of many things. You need to be on top of multiple areas. And as a result of this, I hypothesize that some of these people that appear to be influential are somehow a little bit of Sherpas or shepherding other people that might have less knowledge of multiple areas, dynamics on the IETF, and are maybe helping them to go through the standardization process. Some of our preliminary results suggest that this could be the case. We are looking at psycholinguistic traits in the language used by people, and those with higher influence seem to be using categories of language that are more associated with collaboration and supportive roles. Next slide. Next steps, we are looking into getting some ground truth on several things. So at the moment, we are annotating conversations, agreement, disagreement, and that type of stuff to get a better understanding of what are the internal dynamics at a scale in the conversations within the IETF. This is about drafts in general, and as you probably know, an RFC, there are many RFCs, but not all the RFCs are equal. Some are deployed, some are not deployed, some are relevant, some are pretty much irrelevant. And it's very difficult to have a good metric on this, so we're planning to do a survey asking people like yourself to please help us a bit and tag which ones from your own perspective are deployed or not deployed. We are also working in doing a review recommending engine, and that's the QR code that you can see there, where we are looking at the conversations that every single participant has had, the content of the emails, doing some vectorization of the language use, and looking for similarity to try to identify good matches between IETF participants and drafts to make suggestions of who could be a good reviewer. And we are asking for a little bit of help to, out of those that we identify as potentially good candidates for people who have expertise on the area, to tag them as a good candidate, bad candidate, so we can do a more refined guess starting from this point. Next slide. And these are details of how we are doing it, but I think that I have already talked enough, and probably that's enough for the time being, and I'm very happy to take any questions.
Good job.
So I have several questions about your methodology. Okay. And then you made some conclusions about publishing time. And I have questions about all the methodology. Let me hit 2 or 3 high points and suggest I'd be glad to talk to you offline. There is an original study in the that came about 1990s, 1995s by Simcoe. How do you reference the work that was done there? Or have you looked into the work that he used for classification?
Sorry, can you say that?
Simcoe, S-I-M-C-O-E, lawyer, did a study in this working group reference. He looked at the speed of drafts through the IETF. He looked at conflict, which you haven't mentioned inside of the working group. He looked at complexity. He demonstrated a reference between complexity of informational standards, non-informational standards, things which you can track directly on the data attacker. He also looked at the type of participants creating it. And so I'm just asking whether you've looked at this past statistical work, which was done on the same type of data that you're working on, which is mail list with different assumptions. And I also would like to know your background, scholarly, reference in group dynamics. So again, I'm just pointing out there was a past study and asking first, what past studies do you reference? And then how do you differentiate?
Right. So I would need to check, to be frank. There are quite a few references, and I'm not really sure. I think so, but I would need to check. The other question was about the methodology, sorry?
The second question, one is the basis of your scholarly work in reference to existing technology. No. The second was you made a statement about complexity and delays, and you haven't presented that material yet. Is that in your draft?
I did not make a claim that that's the case. I say that the evidence I find suggests that that could be the case.
Yes, whether you suggest or not, you must have some sort of basis on which that suggestion is made. So I'm asking, is that in your paper, since you didn't cover it here?
There are a bunch of things that point in that direction, but again, I don't think that I could claim that it's harder to publish because that's a judgment based on evidence. But what I can say is that it takes longer to publish, it takes much more drafts, and a few other bits point in that direction as well.
I would suggest that perhaps you need to dig a little deeper in that last statement, because there are several steps between a working group internet draft to working group approval, to ISG approval, to RFC editor, and all of these have different float. So I hope your draft will give us more details. Thank you.
Yeah, you can find it in the paper. I work with Colin Perkins, which is quite aware of the dynamics of the IETF. So we are aware of those issues.
Hi, to save time, I'll stand here. Did you say, I just want to make sure I heard you right. Did you say that you're seeing more collaborative terminology used in recent stuff?
No, what I said is that the people who have more influence, according to the metric that we use, seem to use types of vocabulary that are aligned with collaborative work more than the others.
Thank you.
I'm Jeff Haas. I have a question and an observation. My question is, do you have a flavor of the graphs that are subsorted by working group by age of the working group?
Sorry, I think I'm a little bit deaf. Can you shout a bit?
Do you have a version of your graphs that are done by working group by age of the working group?
No, I don't.
Okay, the observation I will give is that it's possible that the difficulty you're seeing and the trajectories you're seeing are based on new working groups move fast, they put out RFCs more often, and they have fewer considerations about having to worry about backward compatibility for changing. So that probably is one of your inputs to your trajectory. So rerunning your graphs based on working groups by age may give you a different set of graphs.
Yep.
And this is the related piece is influence as well. Influence matters, because you have a long deployed thing. So something like BGP, which has been around for about 30 years, has different considerations than, say, SAVNet that's been around for a year.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I mean, one of the problems that we face is that even though I'm quite well aware of a bunch of areas, I'm not aware of them all. And certainly, I cannot consistently classify technologies and drafts easily. And that's one of the reasons why I was saying that the ground truth in some stuff is really required, because it's very difficult to classify things. So I can classify it in areas, and we're even trying to look at the emerging technologies, but what a definition of scientific or consistent definition that we could use of that is a very tricky thing. And that's also why, for example, I want to look at the RFCs that have been deployed, because it's very different, something that gets deployed from something that is not. But my intuition is exactly the same.
Right. I think you'll find that if you just simply redo the numbers by the age of the mailing list, how long the mailing list has been along, that will be a good proxy.
Yep.
Harald Alderström. The most interesting graph in this presentation was the number of email participants, because it showed the number of email participants going down, while the amount of output seems to be not going down. So I was wondering about what we are thinking about that. Are we interacting in other modes, or with fewer people interacting?
So it's tricky to say because there are a lot of emails. So indeed, it seems like the number of yearly participants is on decline with a bit of cycles, but the number of emails remains consistent. There are several things interacting at the same time. There is an increasing number of automated emails, as you probably know, but that does not change the trends. On the other hand, you have some working groups that are increasingly relying on GitHub, Quick, for example, but it's not a majority in the IETF, contrary to the web consortium. I've looked at those numbers, and I don't think it would change the trend.
So you think it's showing a real decline in the number of people?
That's what I cannot find any evidence that discards that, but again, it's many emails, so I cannot have a, let's say, full grasp on it. But yeah, it does seem that the IETF is becoming chatty.
So
sorry, chatty might be a judgment, but yeah.
So the other question was, is really, how does these observations relate to the subject title of the presentation? Do you think that the IETF is becoming more ossified?
I really don't know. That, to be frank, is a question for you guys that have a better vantage and understanding. I'm looking at the numbers and I have a rough understanding of some areas of the IETF, but I'm not fully embedded on it. But the numbers that I find look a little bit, you might have seen studies of Wikipedia that over the time there is an increasing hierarchization because the structure grows more and the, let's say, explosive moment of emergence, it's over. So there are some similarities with those trends. Is that the case? It's really hard to say. And probably it really depends on which specific moments you are looking at, because the IETF goes a little bit in cycles, right? Like suddenly voice over IP is a new thing, and there is a huge wave of drafts that are related to that, standardizing that technology. So if suddenly next year or in the next 5 years, there is an emergence of something completely new, we would see very different dynamics.
Okay, so when I see a question asked, I kind of go, is there a hint at an answer? And the answer seems to be, we don't know yet. Thank you.
The answer is not given, but evidence that can support an answer into that question is there. This is a work in progress.
Yeah, Carsten Bormann. There certainly is a strong perception with many people that the number of emails have gone up in some form. There is also a perception that the number of emails that are actually being read is going down. And I'm wondering whether we have, of course, we cannot ask people whether they have read mail or something like that. But is there maybe a proxy we could use to find out more about this effect, like finding out whether the email has been replied to? I mean, this is a pretty bad proxy, but maybe the best we actually have. So I would be interested in more information about that.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. I presume that if the number of people it's in decline and the number of emails grows, unless people suddenly grow, increasing capability of attention and time, the number of emails read should be declining. I guess that there are things that could be looked at, like the number of replies and the amount of content in the replies as a potential metric indicating engagement. We're labeling now some conversations for agreement, disagreement, and a few other simple tags that can help understand what's going on in a conversation. And hopefully that might help a little bit to have an understanding of something like the density of conversations and how much engagement an email creates.
Yeah, one interesting aspect of email not being read, if an email is just not read, that's one thing. If people who haven't read the emails continue contributing to the thread, that can lead to very interesting discussions, and that has wasted a lot of time in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I could imagine that. To be frank, I wouldn't know how could I compute that, but yeah, that's a very fair point.
Jean-Luc, A quick question. Sorry if I missed that. What kind of mailing lists you were looking at? Are you excluding IETF Discuss, for example?
I think that we were including them all, but if I remember, no, but if I remember, the overwhelming majority of the emails comes from the working group area, from the working group mail lists. So anything that would happen in Discuss would not alter the findings. But to be frank, I would have to check because I don't remember. I recall that we excluded a few.
Yeah, because I think it's completely different dynamics,
Yes.
maybe.
Yes.
Okay. With that, thank you very much, Ignacio. While Greg Wood is coming up, and Maria, if she's in here, I'd like to remind everybody, if you have not signed in, to please sign in. And if you feel like you're a little bit too hot and in a closed room, remember that accurate numbers on how many people are in the room help us with capacity planning. So if you want a bigger room next time, be sure you sign in.
I think I'm at the right microphone. Yeah, so just a few quick updates. You've seen emails on both of these. The first one is that we're moving to a new wiki platform. And one of the things we want to do is make sure to get all the working group wikis onto the new platform. A few of you have already done that, so congrats. Your prize is in the mail. And a few of you have talked to me about making that happen, and congrats on that too, because we're definitely here to help. If you haven't yet migrated your content, or if you need help doing that, please contact me directly. All I can say is that the new platform is super nice, works on mobile, all those nice things. And also the plan currently is to discontinue Track, supporting Track as a web service in the nearish future. So you definitely do need to make the move. So that's number one. And you can grab me during the meeting here as well if you happen to be on site. I'm happy to take email. Second one I wanted to bring up was that we are reprising a new and improved version of the working group chairs training that we did last year. We got very, very positive feedback on that training from last year, and also a lot of really good suggestions about how to make it better. And we're doing that thanks to input from folks in the community. I see Barry here, he's active. Roman Denlu also providing good input, and a few others, Doty and so forth. So I really encourage you to sign up. The links won't work on if you just point at that screen there, but they will work if you go to the chairs.ietf.org/training, and you can just sign up. Clarification, there's some confusion sometimes. We have 3 classes. We have 2 sessions of each class, so you only need to sign up for 1 session for each class, and you don't need to sign up for every class. So you can pick and choose for what works for you. And I'm also happy to answer questions about that. The last thing is if you can't make any of those, we are definitely holding or developing an on-demand version that will be more than just videos that are an hour long. So those will also be new and improved. Again, ask me questions if I can answer any questions you have or provide more info. Thanks.
One second.
Jim, is this for Greg? Is it for Greg? Does he need to come back?
I'm not sure you need to answer anything here. But... Actually, this is just more of a comment. Jim Fenton. Just to point out, if anybody doesn't realize, IETF has brought in outside trainers, professional trainers, to give the chairs training, and they're getting a lot of input from several of us on what the content should be, so that it's not just a standard, resolving conflict thing, that it really addresses the IETF way of doing things. So, any of you that would benefit from the training, I just want to emphasize that IETF considers this important, because they're they're hiring people to do it. So please take advantage.
Yeah, actually, as I'm standing here, I also took some of the trainings, and I think like one of the most valuable parts was also that just having a discussion with the other chairs on these topics during the trainings was super valuable. Just exchange some ideas. How do you handle a situation like this? So I don't think the video that will show up will give you the same thing. But that's not why I'm here. I can.
Yeah.
Perfect. So like as you're all here, I thought I'd take the opportunity and tell you about something that we're working on. I've been studying this initiative because when I started as a chair at some point, it was really confusing to me like how to use the data tracker best. And that's not necessarily because the data tracker is so confusing. It's just like, well, it's hard to use. It's just like I didn't even know of all of these features that are in the data tracker and like how other chairs are using them and what's the best way to use them. So in order to address this problem maybe a little bit, what we've been trying to do is trying to create some quick start how-to guides. Like this is like, as the example shows here, it's like a kind of, I don't know, 6-step guides how to adopt a document, which buttons to click and what are the steps. These how-to guides were actually not hard to create. It was like not a lot of effort. But what took more time is to figure out what are the things that we want to create those guides about. And I think this is also one of the big values, hopefully, that you will get out of it, even if you use the data tracker quite extensively. Looking at these guides, you might actually know what other functions are available, and then you may or may not use the guide to actually do it. So that's what we're doing. The 3 examples that are on the slide, I think those are already online. Greg, where did you go? Soon, very soon, on the chairs.itf.org page. And we are working on a few more. And we would need your input if that's actually helpful for you or if you should like continue it. As I said, there are a couple of things to keep in mind. One thing is, I think a big value is just like having a list of these so you understand what's available in the data tracker. You don't have to do it this way. You don't have to use it this way, but at least you know. The second thing is we are also providing just one way to use the data tracker or to go through the process. There's like in a lot of cases, the process is very wide, and that's also why the data tracker has all these different states and buttons. So in these quick guides are intended to be quick. So they give you exactly one way to do it that we, in the small group we've been developing these, think is like kind of the most common way to use it. But like, of course, you don't have to do it that way. And I think the third thing to keep in mind is also that the data tracker is not only there to support you in your management of the working group. I think that's like one of the main tests, but it does also have the participants if you put some information in the data tracker and they can look it up. So that's also something we've been trying to address. That's it. So watch out for it, provide us feedback about the existing guides, what other guides are useful, open bugs or send me email, or if you want to participate, also let me know. Yeah, and then as I'm standing here, a very quick note about something that we discussed this morning on the IESG. So we discussed this problem that we have this online humming tool, which is not an online humming tool, right? Like some people say it's a voting tool, and it's also sometimes confusing and so on. So this is just a reminder that it's actually not supposed to be a humming tool, not supposed to be a voting tool because we are not voting. So it is really helpful, even if people see the number on the screens, that you, if you're sharing a session, make clear that this is not the decision-making process. The decision-making process is taking this vote as input to the rough consensus judgment that you're making, and actually expressing that to the audience, to your group, is really important. So that's just a very quick reminder. Thank you.
All right, so I missed an item on the agenda. This is a working group chair fail here, but Charles, did you want to come up? Sorry about that.
What is he going to talk about?
Actually, that was really good ordering, because I think one of the quick guides there was about using additional, what was it called? Additional resources in the data tracker. And my favorite one that I've mentioned to you at the last working group chair meeting, I wanted to mention again because it's relatively new and I think it's important, is the related implementations. And I just had a couple slides here for those of you who haven't done it. I don't know if this is the way that the quick guide shows, but this is just two screenshots. One that kind of shows where it appears on the data tracker screen. You have these additional resources. And one of them that you can add, if you go to the next slide, is you can put in related implementations. And you actually have a lot of freedom in terms of exactly what text string you put there and where, say, the link, if you put a link and what that points to. We haven't formalized that as to what's the best thing to do. Some people point to a README that lists multiple different resources. Some people put one of these for each resource. One of the things I think would be good for us to think about is, do we want to recommend a certain way of doing this? And then the second thing would be, for at least currently, anyone can use this and add this for an individual draft. They're in charge, they have the ability to put this. If once it's a working group draft, then they need the help of the working group chair to add this. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I just wanted to point out that's the way it currently works. And if we think that's, you know, appropriate and the way it should stay, great. And I believe for RFCs, it's kind of similar that if the working group that is tied to that RFC still exists, well, then that working group, those chairs can actually add this for an RFC, I believe. Otherwise, I assume it goes to, you know, you have to bug one of the people who are really making changes to the data tracker, and maybe they have some super user skills there, so they can help you out. Hank?
Yeah, so hi, this is Hank. So my first question would be, how is this related to BCP 205 implementation status? As a guidance, how to reference that in an ID that will go away when this is becoming an RFC or proposed standard. So at the moment, it's not a big problem. We are referring to one GitHub thing. There's one contact. We select one of the study.
Yep.
We will have the future problem that there will be multiple. The BCP is not super clear on that. This seems to be connected to all of this. Would that update the result of this manifest in an update of BCP 205? That would be great, for example.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a good point. There's actually a draft that I wrote that I think is expired now. It's in the EDM working group that kind of looks at what are the various mechanisms that we have out right now for relating code to our drafts. What you mentioned, the implementation status is an option. Yeah. I know a lot of people strip that out as part of your document becoming an RFC. The RFC editor kind of lets you know, typically we remove this. Is that okay? If you don't want it, you need to, you know, kind of get your AD approval of that.
I see.
So, you know, the implementation status generally means the implementation, like that's a little more narrow focused in a way than this related implementation. Because this related implementation might just be a tool that helps you with debugging the deployment, you know, in case someone ever does implement your draft or your RFC. So I think it's that they're not they're related, but they aren't duplicates of each other.
Yeah, but the related theme here is landing pages. So the data tracker could be a landing page for an RFC and its implementation, so that you can find them at the tracker, because the RFC at some point is like sealed. Same way for the implementation status. The link there doesn't have to be the implementation. It can be a landing page pointing again to various implementations. I think that's the theme both share and that could be reflected somewhere, I guess.
Okay. Yep, good point. And if anyone else is interested in maybe working with me on reviving that, the draft that's in EDM, we can figure out how to move that forward. That's it.
Okay. Unfortunately, I've had to go ahead and close the queue because it's just turned to 12:45. So at this point, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much for coming. Please take your garbage and take any questions to the mailing list.
Rubbish.
Rubbish. remove your rubbish from the room.
So this is cool. It's the actual IETF AV plan.
Oh, I see.
It's very neat. I'm just gonna give it a J, but yeah, it's cool. Shows like the view of the the microphone, the cameras and all. Very neat. Oh. You did it. Thanks again for letting me ride your coattails.
I just, it would help if I actually didn't do it at the very last minute. And then
Then I have a chance to do something, but that's okay. I am kind of busy.
I just know it's.
With all your other work.
Are you? Okay,
That's the one that fails, right?
That's theirs,
Get stuff set up on this machine.
yeah, no, I know that there's.
It's not a mouse for this one, just a keypad, right?
Pardon?